DFW. Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to talk to you all tonight about coding as a data scientist because a lot of people think we don't code. And I know if you saw my MySpace page back in the day, it was definitely coded hardcore. So I'm just saying, I know how to code between you and me. But I never obviously looked at what I did as kind of coding initially because obviously it wasn't the same thing that some of my male counterparts were doing and what they saw as coding, but the back end of databases definitely has their own amount of coding involved, and setting up databases has coding involved, obviously. So even back in the day when I was just writing SQL, I definitely considered myself a coder, even if other people didn't see it that way. So I'm excited to be talking to you all about this topic tonight. Okay, so let me see, how do I, okay. So DataReady, what do I do with DataReady? Well, DataReady is an organization, and we're the only organization of our kind in the world that's founded by a woman of color, specifically, especially one who has different abilities. And so that's pretty rare. You don't see that many women of color in this community, unfortunately. And that's something that we're looking to change. Just one of the communities we're looking to bring into the fold, because we definitely see that when we look at population and total, there's definitely a divide between who makes up the data science community. And so to a certain extent, that means that the dialogue around what is data science is being controlled by specific groups of people in our society who maybe look at it one way, but then there's people that are, you know, coming at it from a very different place that may look at it very differently. And so we really want to engage in those types of dialogues that have people discussing, especially as we go into, you know, things like COVID and right now the Black Lives Matter movement. Data is integral to those discussions because we need to have good data practices in order to have good data about what's going on with those things. And I think that those two specific events just recently are just two of the many examples that we see in popular culture of how data impacts all of us. That curve graph, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to not remember the flatten the curve graph. So it's obvious that data has an impact on all of our lives, whether for good or for bad. And so we're really focused on bridging the divide when it comes to data literacy, first and foremost, instead of just solely focusing on training data scientists. We're looking at bringing the data literacy skills that we know are integral to every single career path to the general population, especially to any kind of organization or population that's been kind of left behind in terms of innovation around data. So we not only work with individuals, but we more so work with organizations. And so we will come into an organization and we will often upskill their employees. This may be a nonprofit, a government agency, anything like that, where they do obviously have underserved communities that they are managing, and we'll come in and help them as well to get innovative practices in, train their employees in data, whether or not they are data scientists at all. We really want people to be involved in the discussion around data because it's valuable across the board. But we also do focus on K through 12 as well as adult training. We partner with different organizations though to facilitate that. So it's not just like a free-for-all type of program like you see at some of these organizations. We work with other agencies, generally nonprofits, to be able to provide that training to those individuals or the Texas workforce, anything like that. So the people we're specifically looking for are not necessarily college educated at all. Maybe they've been in a different career for a long time, and it could potentially be kind of in limbo as a result of automation. And so they're really looking for something that's going to give them the flexibility they need, especially as COVID kind of taught us that, you know, some jobs are kind of at risk, whereas some of us can work from home, some of us can't, unfortunately. And that causes a lot of problems in households where you already have an income divide. And so right now we're seeing families kind of trying to decide whether or not someone can stay home with the kids or go to work. And so we've also been very heavy about pushing remote opportunities, which is why things like coding are so integral to what we do, but also the discussion should be pushed in the direction that we are coders so people understand that we can work home just like work from home just like anybody else. So we're very pro working from home. So we do both the education as well as the consulting. And so we're really just geared on creating accessible content for people. And so we really kind of bring our content down to the level where people are at, which is also another big kind of point of differentiation between ourselves and some other organizations out there that maybe do dabble in data. We're really focused on the kind of people that maybe aren't considering a career in data science at all and just want to have tech skills so that they can be able to do their own job better that they have already and maybe get a promotion or whatever. And that's one thing that's maybe holding them back is their technology skills. It's really something that we care about, and especially the exposure part of it. We work with organizations like Girl Scouts of North Texas, which for this group I think is a good group to bring up. And it's phenomenal to work with young girls and show them how we can use data science with a variety of other types of skill sets, whether it be biology, robotics, AI, all of these things are driven by data now. And so we can teach them how accessible data is through even things like selling cookies. So it's pretty cool to be able to provide that context for people who maybe were scared of data initially because they were like, oh, I don't know what that really means. I don't really understand it. And so I'm just gonna not pay any attention to it. But then when they see how graphs are driving so many parts of, apps and all these dashboards that they interact with on a daily basis already, whether they like it or not, it's really important that they understand how to be data literate and then also ask questions when they encounter data that may not be real or accurate. And I see that so often now. I find myself fact-checking data so often because I feel like people don't have a really good grasp on data literacy, and therefore they don't really understand how to go down the rabbit hole and ask the right questions of how the data was actually aggregated. And so as a result, we think that obviously data is the bee's knees. We drink the data Kool-Aid. I'm always telling people that I feel like one of those like preachers that preaches the gospel, and instead of like telling people the good word, I'm telling people the good data word and telling them how cool data is. So I feel like data, it holds the answers to so many of our questions in society. And if we just put numbers behind it, then we'll have the facts that we need in order to verify that things are or are not a certain way. Which is kind of interesting because I feel like in the business industry, it's very much geared towards the empath sort of thinking, or it was in a lot of industries for a long time, where people just kind of use their gut to figure out what to do next. And unfortunately, that can be a costly mistake in our world that we live in now, as we've seen in a lot of instances. You can't just rely on your gut anymore. It's a good place to start, but you have to work with that and build on top of actual facts, and data is the way to get to that point. So the reason that we focus so heavily on this specific industry is because we see that there's a real need. And additionally, we see this gap, which is something that I talked about in my dissertation, which is why I think this discussion about coding is so integral. There's definitely a gap. There's these people that focus specifically heavy on one part of data science, and there's plenty of those people that are being pushed out into the workforce, but then there's this whole kind of middle sector of people that are doing things like coding and things that are kind of being forgotten about, and these roles aren't necessarily getting filled as often. And then there's also definitely a surgence of people looking for kind of this cross-trained individual who's not only a data scientist, but is also kind of a developer, and maybe a little bit of, maybe they do front end and back end, and like they can do all that stuff too on top of being a data scientist. And so for you all, some of you come to the table with a vast set of skills on kind of the computer science, more technical side that we kind of don't have in the data side naturally in our training. And so I think it provides an opportunity for many people that maybe are already in your organization to kind of add on to the knowledge they already have to provide kind of another selling skill in the event that they are right now in a position where they're looking for a job, which I know a lot of us are. So I know that that's something that's on a lot of minds right now. And so if you do have all of those kind of general coding skills, development skills, those are definitely great complementary skills to any data science kind of knowledge. And data science is just a great kind of complement to any skill set, which is the great thing about it. I just don't think you should do data science by itself in any instance. And so I tell people that a lot because of that. There is such a vast horizon of opportunities that you really can get lost kind of in it all. And so you do have to focus on one specific kind of area of it. It doesn't have to be the same industry necessarily, but kind of a niche area you should focus in on. You can't just be like a data scientist anymore. You have to have a focus area. Otherwise you can get easily lost in kind of the noise, because there are a lot of people out there now training through these boot camps, and they're getting pushed out in large numbers, and there's got to be points of differentiation being brought to the table to add on to that. So anything you can add as far as skill set is always valuable. So where do we find data science in this kind of ecosystem? Because a lot of times there's a lot of disagreement even within our own data science community, unfortunately, still about where it is exactly that we lie. Because we see people now that are talking about AI very heavily, but they're kind of leaving data science sometimes out of the conversation, which is kind of unfortunate, because it means that a lot of people don't understand that data science is feeding all of these different areas and industries that we're seeing is so innovative. And so we see computer science, we see domain expertise, and we see mathematics all kind of overlapping. And that's where we find data science. And then on top of that, we see some overlapping between research, statistical research, data processing and management, and then also machine learning. And then I would also add artificial intelligence on top of that now too, because they haven't really included that in this graph, but I would say that that also lies in the same area as machine learning. So if you have a specific domain expertise, it is good. So maybe you're a business major and you just thought that now you want to get into tech. That's great, because you can bring the skill set you already have as a business person into the table. And so if you have a degree already, that's fine. You don't have to go feel like you need to get another degree in something else, because that domain knowledge you have is already very valuable, especially if it's a domain you already love being in. I know I personally love music, and so I never thought of myself as being someone who would go into like a math or computer science type of career, like ever. I didn't think that was what was in the cards for me when I was doing musical theater and all that kind of stuff in high school. But I see now how valuable that skill set is to what I do, because it just gives me a domain to be able to kind of approach data from that maybe other people don't necessarily know as much about. So data science, we code, y'all, we do. So how do we code? We do it in a variety of different programming languages. One of the most common things I get asked by people looking to get into data science is, okay, what should I learn? Because there's all different languages out there and I'm really overwhelmed. I don't know what to focus in on. Well, these are just a few of the ones you can focus in on. And I think statistically, I would say that the three on the left-hand side, Python, R, and SQL, are the three most valuable ones. At this point, if you know those three, you're in a good spot. But then I would also add on top of that, obviously, now the cloud has also kind of brought another level to that discussion as well, because it integrates all of those as also and adds kind of another layer on top that I think is probably the most valuable at this point, because I see the biggest kind of shift and for all of us being kind of the shift to the cloud environment and how that's going to impact what we do, especially as we move to more virtual type of opportunities and roles. I see the cloud as really becoming a booming thing, with a lot of small and mid-sized organizations who've never done it before now hesitantly dipping their feet into the water and saying, I like this actually. I know I didn't want to give the keys over to somebody else, but this is actually a pretty good idea now that I see that I don't have to come up here when everybody else is at home enjoying themselves while we're under lockdown, because I feel like that's the situation a lot of people were in at that point. So what specific programming language do we use most often? It's no surprise, Python is number one, R, SQL, and then we kind of see it go down from there. I think this data about data is very valuable, because then we can kind of see the distinction here. And so the question of, okay, well, what languages should I use and learn is kind of spelled out for you here. And so then you see Java, though, as that fourth one, because for a lot of you all, I'm sure in here from kind of the events that I see most often, I'm sure things like Java would be things that you would already probably know. And so that would give you a very unique skill to bring to the table that I think would make you even more valuable. If you knew Java, SQL, R, and Python, you could pretty much name your price of for jobs. So you know, there's enough resources for you out there that I don't think that would be too hard of a thing to tackle at this point right now. Especially in COVID, we're seeing a huge boom in the market right now. I am a huge proponent of free education. I have, full disclosure, 6 figures worth of student loan debt. And I don't want that reality for anyone else if I can help it. And so I'm always pushing people, especially people that already have degrees, already have student loan debt, and don't want to get more on top of what they already have, and just need a job that's going to actually make them enough money for them to actually pay those student loans off that they got. We encourage people to find free education where at all possible. And we know that for everybody that's not possible, but if you can, it's always a great resource. I think LinkedIn Learn is a great place to start your kind of journey into this and dip your feet into the water. I always tell people that a subscription is a great investment. There's tons of resources on there. The certificates show up on your LinkedIn automatically once you complete them. It's a win-win. Recruiters see it, they match you, it's perfect. So I say go after those certificates, get them, put them on your LinkedIn, update your LinkedIn so that people know you have all that on there, and then just hit the ground running. So additionally, we're looking at some salary ranges because I think that's probably what everybody wants to know when it comes to coding, and getting a job right now, I'm sure is hot on everyone's mind, as we can see from the stats. So this is just kind of giving you an idea of, you know, salary ranges. And what I will say is you'll notice that the ones that we saw on the last slide that were some of the ones that were least kind of used were the ones that also on this end have the highest salaries. So this is by no means like an overall view, because there's definitely ones like the cloud certifications around data. If you get those, you're looking at like a 6-figure salary off the gate, off of just a certification. So if you do want to get into data, I would say not only are some of these ones at the top good to know, but I would say learning anything that goes with any of the cloud technologies, whether it's AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, is not a bad idea right now, because per dollar, like per hour, those are the highest paid certifications available across all industries. So they, you know, they're good to go after. And they're all free for the training, you just pay to take the tests. So these are all great ones to learn too. As you can see, it kind of gives you an idea of what kind of salary you'd be looking at depending on which of these languages you focus on for your coding. And then we're going to talk about Python, because everybody loves bringing up Python when we have a discussion about data science. So I think it's always a good one to talk about. And we can see that Python, obviously, compared to smaller growing technologies, we can see how quickly it grew, even over R, because R was, people don't know that R's been out for kind of a long time, but it's just kind of slowly trickled. But Python just boomed. And so Python's a great one to start with if you want to kind of additionally dip your feet into the water. Okay, and so I also additionally linked some resources here for you to find some more resources around free, yes, you heard me right, free Python and free R training that you can get. Take advantage of all of the organizations doing COVID things right now, and go ahead and take advantage of the free things people are giving us. And there's tons of free learning. I know even organizations like Harvard were giving away their data science program for free to people. So it's a great time to be trying to learn some new skills. So you guys are in a great spot right now.
Okay.
All right. And now that brings us to the end. So this is going to be the question portion where you all get to ask your questions and interact with me. And so take it away. Jordan, you're muted.
So, thank you. If you would like to ask a question, you can just unmute yourself and ask. We would love it if you had your video on. Or if you aren't in a position, your house is loud, whatever, you can also put those questions in the chat, and I will go ahead and read that to Dr. Durr, and we'll get you involved as well. So far, the chat is very happy about the free resources.
That's always a big hit. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not mad about it. You guys can get more excited about that than me, and I have no problem with it at all.
Yeah, I noticed free resources. I've been poking around because free is nice. And so, yeah, there was EDX, I think the .org.
Oh yeah, edX is great. I also do Memo. I think apps, personally, a lot of people don't push apps in the data community because they look at it as kind of inferior. But I personally think the apps are the best way to start dipping your toe into the water. Like Memo and all those apps, they're great. Solo Learn, those are all wonderful apps to use. You can learn tons about coding on Solo Learn too. And they're so affordable that pretty much anybody can afford it, and you can just do it on your own time.
Okay. Yeah, and with the cloud you were talking about, I think I found a free class for like cloud computing intro on that edX. So is that like a good place to start?
Oh yeah, I would say any of the clouds that you want to dip your toes into right now, go ahead and learn cloud languages, do all of the cloud coding that you can do. Cloud is definitely the market where it's going. So you behoove yourself to get a jump on where everybody's going to be going before it's like insane.
Okay. And so for because I've been researching where to start, because I'm not new to coding per se, but I'm coming from biology, and I did have a chance to do some data analysis in R, but it's been a little while, so I'm coming back. I'm coming back to coding, and so yeah, you were confirming some things that I have been poking around and found that Python and R, SQL, and I was thinking of looking into intros for Java and C++, so I'm glad you said that about Java.
Yeah, I would definitely say Java is a good one. And I mean, honestly, people get mad at me for saying this, but I kind of see an evolution, especially the way that the cloud does it, in which they're kind of driving the market towards more a module-based approach to all of these different languages. Instead of you actually just writing freehand code, you just kind of drag and drop the things you need. And that's kind of what they're already doing in the cloud environment. So I kind of see that shift will kind of take over. And so I don't necessarily think that anybody should just break their neck to try to learn every single language out there, because it's impossible. But, learn a few, and then you'll understand the concept of what they do. And then you'll be able to just quickly learn anything from that point.
Okay.
Thank you for your questions, Andrea. Ashley, were you wanting to ask a question as well?
I did. Hi, Angel. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. So my question really surrounds, I'm very heavily involved in the HR community, and what we're seeing right now in HR is basically a shift from being, you talked about this earlier, from being kind of shooting from the hip on questions and how to solve things, to being driven more towards data and being able to back up what it is that we're trying to drive. So my question to you is, how would an HR professional who doesn't necessarily have that background, where would be a good place for that person maybe to start in getting engaged in data?
I would say, depending on how your organization is kind of set up, there's probably a system that you're using, like maybe, I think the one we used at our organization was Workday. Have you heard of Workday before? I believe that's the HR platform we were on. So
Definitely.
HR has its own set of systems that they use internally. So I would say that a good place to start would be learning your own HR systems. There's all kinds of different HR, kind of equivalent to a CRM, but more focused on HR specific needs, being built as we speak. And then there's a bunch on the market that people use that basically integrate all that HR data and then give you like a dashboard, kind of a view. You would definitely it would benefit you to learn about anything analytics related, because I feel like that's where your discussion will kind of go down. And so learning how to create dashboard content, so things like Power BI or anything like that would be probably a good place to start, so you understand the concepts of dashboards and all that kind of stuff. And then I would also start looking into some HR related systems. That's the only one I know off the top of my head, but I know there's a few other really popular ones that people use specifically for the purposes of aggregating all of that HR data. So who people are, how long they've worked for you, all of that is just data. And then maybe even interacting with like some tools like Salesforce. I always tell people that Salesforce is a good place for people to kind of start out who've never done anything at all with data, and they're just like kind of like, I don't even really get this. Maybe they don't really want to code or anything like that either. Salesforce is very module driven already, which is kind of where I see a lot more of this kind of language driven stuff going. And so you can already kind of drag and drop things, but you'll understand the concept of what we mean when we talk about data pretty well from that system, because they do such a great job of storing data, storing attributes, and having a system set up where you can kind of make it your own by building out applications. So you do a fair amount of coding, but it's all kind of within this environment that's kind of secluded, and it's a little easier for you to get engaged with it. But I would definitely start with the HR systems, because your own systems are a great place to start. You guys have different systems that you already use in order to maintain all of the data about your the people who work for your organization. It's just more so kind of building some dashboards and analytics from that, which you may have the ability to do in your system, but then you may need to use a resource like a Power BI or a Tableau, depending on what your organization uses, to be able to then boil all of that data up into some specific KPIs. I would recommend definitely learning about KPIs and metrics and how to create those kind of things, and come up with the ideas for what you want to measure, strategic planning. All of those things are actually more so what you should probably start focusing on, and then get into the nitty gritty of actually how to apply that to be able to do the technical part of it once you understand kind of the theoretical framework behind why you're doing what you're doing. Because every person that works for you has data. And we actually, not that long ago, I was at a women coding event, and we had to come up with an innovation. And I actually came up with the idea there of like a CRM type of system for HR, because HR doesn't necessarily always have the best systems in terms of how they manage their HR data and how they actually view it, especially now that we're looking at things like diversity and inclusion. You need to have a good way to measure that, and organizations don't necessarily have good insight on that stuff because of the fact that they don't have good systems for managing all those data pieces.
Well, I appreciate that. Yep, you mentioned three good things. So ADP is what we used. ADP does a lot of the measurements for us.
ADP, yeah. They're one of the programs that has their own system. So that would make sense. I would learn the ins and outs of ADP, and don't even mess with the coding yet. But then if they have their own dashboards and everything built in, then start looking into how to do that part of it.
Perfect. Thanks, Angel. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Awesome. We have a couple of questions from the chat here. Andrea says, hi, Angel Durr. Could you talk about data science focusing on the environmental field?
Sure. So that's actually kind of a thing that I talk about with the Girl Scouts, because we talk about the environment a lot and how we measure and track different trends in the environment, and how we can use that data in order to forecast out certain things. So a lot of organizations now that are looking at things like climate change, they're measuring different aspects of basically our environment, our earth, and recording that data and keeping it in systems so that they can measure and track it. And then also things like GIS are giving us opportunities within data to actually look at data on a geographic scale and be able to map out different types of trends that are occurring, natural phenomenon. So, you know, the sun, like maybe it's getting really hot in one area, so you start tracking the heat on a map so that you can start looking at the data that way. So there's a lot of like different types of data being looked at, but they're still applying the same principles that everyone else is doing. They're just measuring all of these different areas of phenomenon, which is all data science is. So you can apply it to sports, you can apply it to music, you can apply it to art. Everybody has phenomenon that's being measured. Every organization has something that they're measuring and tracking, and that's pretty much all data science brings to the table, is the ability to actually aggregate all of those different dimensions around a certain phenomenon and then track that somehow, and then have a kind of a pulse on what's going on through that.
Nice. That's awesome.
But then we also see it being driven through things like artificial intelligence, where that data is being used to try to improve the environment through artificial intelligence means, and robots and all kinds of different things they're trying to do to try to hold on to the environment and keep it in the condition that it's in right now. So it's a great time that's definitely a good one to be able to know. You can go and take those skills to a lot of different large organizations that do conservation or different studies or analysis. I mean, across the board research, there's a lot of different ways you can apply it.
Awesome. Talking about applying, Andrea says thank you.
No problem.
Ashley asks, are there resources that help for questions to ask why you would need to use a certain tool? She said, I'm learning SQL, Python, and data visualization, but I feel like it's mostly like learning the language, but not really knowing how and when to apply it.
Honestly, that's one of the hardest things about being a data scientist, is knowing when it's appropriate to use what tool you have in your toolkit. And it's really hard to make a blanket kind of application of those types of things, because everyone's coming at it from a different skill level with a different skill set. And so it may not be the same for every person. So I try not to get as worked up about what I'm going to be using for what, and just focus on having a diverse enough framework of understanding that I can be flexible, because you never know what kind of organization you're going to get into. So you can't just get rigid and get stuck on one language and be like, that's it, that's all I do, or these two languages are all I do. You have to kind of be willing to make yourself flexible enough and stay abreast on the newest technologies, because there's always new data science things rolling out, so that you're up on the trends, more so than just knowing any specific thing. I would say focus on your jobs. And so even with the people that I mentor, I tell them, go find me 3 job postings for your dream job. Go find me 3. And then I want you to do some data analysis on that and tell me what are the commonalities between those 3 job postings, or 10 job postings, however many job postings you want in your dream jobs, and find out what skill sets overlap the most, and then go after those skill sets. That's all that I tell people to do. So applying data science to the actual finding of a job also. It can be applied to everything.
That's awesome. You have excellent advice, says Natasha.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes, of course.
Hi, it's Natasha. So thank you for the information. It's really impactful, especially the slide you had about 85%, like there's a need, like 85% need for data scientists, 15% actual data scientists today. So would you say, in your opinion, the gap would be there's not enough qualified people, or is the gap where employers want people, they want to hire people with experience?
It's a little bit of both, I would say. I would say it's not so much that they want to hire people with experience, as a lot of employers are looking for a very specific skill set, and they need a specific set of skills that sometimes people don't have, because a lot people get focused in kind of one avenue, and they're not like as flexible around what they want to do. So I always tell people, that's why I tell people to actually look at their dream jobs, because there's really no way for you to know, unfortunately, that kind of stuff. So you just kind of have to be willing to kind of roll with it and see what happens out there. But I also think that one of the best ways to get the hands-on learning that you're trying to kind of get at this point, which it sounds like is kind of the missing link, is being able to know, you know, seeing people actually apply it, so you can kind of think through those decisions that they make in order to decide, okay, this is what I'm going to use for this situation. And so sometimes just looking at things like case studies is a good place to start your journey, and then build it out from there, and maybe even start looking at some open source data and trying to do some of your own kind of digging, and look at how, you know, some of the ways that you can kind of differently put the data together in order to come to some different conclusions. I always recommend just playing with data that you can find. There's enough open source data repositories out there that you can get your hands on some massive amounts of data and start doing some different things with it, looking at some different dimensions, and then, you know, get a GitHub, start posting things that you create, share your content, create a digital portfolio. For all of you out there that are, you know, coding warriors who don't do the boot camps, who just, you know, go at it guerrilla style and learn, you need a digital portfolio of all of your projects that you've done so you can share. So doing some of this stuff on your own shows a lot of initiative to people, and so that's very attractive to employers, and it also helps you to be able to really understand what you're doing. You're never going to understand it by just learning the code and being a code monkey. You have to have that analytical reasoning that you're not going to get from that. You need to have that business side where you're able to look at a case study like a business student would, and be able to think through what they thought through and make those decision-making steps, which I think right now is the reason, another reason that doesn't get talked about enough of why there's this gap, which is why diversity and inclusion and going to underserved communities is why we focus on that, because we think that's part of that missing link, is that a lot of these people are just being trained with coding skills. They're not being given the business decision-making, analytical reasoning ability that they need to actually think through decisions and decide what's appropriate for what situation. And they also aren't able to really articulate what they're doing to other people, because there's this whole other storytelling aspect of data science, where if you can't articulate what we do to someone who doesn't necessarily do what we do, then you don't really know what you think you know. So work on trying to do, you know, explain what you do to a child. And if you can explain what you do to a child, you can explain it to anybody. So just focus on bringing, you know, the natural abilities that you have to whatever you do, and then try to show that off in some of the creative projects that you on independently.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'd like to piggyback, if I could,
Sure.
on that. So I noticed that you're saying to get data, where would we get data to play with, basically, after we get the skills?
So I believe it's opendata.gov is one of the first places you can go, but I can also share some additional resources after this is over. I have like my own little list of some open source repositories to data, but you can also just search. There's some great resources out there if you just look for open source data. Most, like City of Dallas has their own open source data repository. Most local communities have a city repository, so that's a good place to start. You can look at your own, you know, neighborhood and start looking at, you know, maybe I don't know, start looking at crime and I don't know, trash, I don't know, whatever is cool to you when you find, that's a good place to start, because it actually impacts you. Start looking at data that you interact with every day. Do you have a Fitbit? Have you ever like dug into the data on the back end of that? Do you have an Amazon account? You can actually look at your data from Amazon. You can look at your own data. You can look at your own Facebook data. You can look at your own Instagram data, Twitter. So you can start with your own data and start analyzing your own life if you really kind of want to start looking at things that are kind of interesting and that you can more easily grasp, and then start developing out into some of the higher level concepts once you understand kind of the basic understanding of what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
All right, wonderful. I think we are getting towards the end of our time. Does anyone else? We have a couple more questions from the chat that we can go through. But does anyone else have a question they want to ask over the air before we get to those?
Yeah, I've got a question about how you went from musical theater to data science.
You know, you would be surprised. I have a really good friend that worked at Google, and he's a bassist. So there's a lot of us out there that are like this weird hybrid of tech meets creative that are doing really cool things. Like data visualization is huge for artists. I'm always telling my artist friends, don't be like a starving artist. Go do data visualization and then still make your art that you enjoy making for fun. But you can make a lot of money doing data visualization, which is art. And so I think that if people start thinking about the skills that they bring to the table in kind of a different way, then they'll realize how valuable they are. Because for me, growing up doing pageants and acting and musical theater and all these things, I learned how to talk to people, how to communicate, how to articulate a story well, which are all things I do as a data scientist. For my day-to-day work at this point where I am, I don't do a lot of the day-to-day grunt coding anymore. I'm more so in front of people talking to C-level executives about how they can improve their efficiency in their organization. So those talking abilities, those communication abilities that I learned from that are very valuable. And then not only that, but the creative problem solving I learned from being a creative artsy person is really easily applicable to this environment because you have to have excellent problem solving skills. And so I'm always articulating that some of these marginalized communities have the amazing problem solving skills you need to be successful because they've dealt with a lot of problems in their life. They've overcome them, and they're now in a much better place as a result. And so you can see that they have really good problem solving skills already naturally. And so just use the natural abilities you have and see how you can apply those to a specific skill area. And I'm sure within data, there's enough niche areas that you can find a place that fits for you. And data storytelling is huge right now. They don't have enough people who can tell good stories around data and articulate it to a broad community who maybe doesn't have any understanding of it. You see a lot of people that talk over people and above their heads to try to make themselves seem smart, and most organizations don't want that. They want someone to come in and just give them the facts and tell them what they need to do in a way that they can easily understand and trust. So that's what I do. And so I bring that storytelling to everything that I do, that creativity to everything that I do. My visualizations are beautiful because of that. So yeah, I bring my creativity to the table for sure.
That's awesome.
PowerPoints too. You better know how to do PowerPoints. What kind of a thing you do. You have to know PowerPoints. So we all got to do a little of those sometimes. So you have to have some kind of creativity, unfortunately.
Awesome, awesome. So we're going to go with one more question. I thought Kimberly had an awesome question. What websites and podcasts do you follow to get the latest data science info?
Okay, hold on. Let me tell you. I will read you my list right now. Hold on, I'm going to pull my Spotify up as we speak. So I'm a Spotifyer. So there's a few different things that I do also. I'm also a big proponent. I don't know if you've ever heard of the, like I said, LinkedIn Learn. That's the first place I always go. There's tons of resources on there that are pertinent to data science. So that's a great place to start. And then additionally, on top of that, I'm a big podcast person. And then I also listen to quite a bit of audiobooks. I have an app called Blinkist, and basically it condenses books down into like 4 minutes or 5 minutes. And so I listen to a book really fast. And so I'll listen to a lot of new data science books on there too. But as far as podcasts, let me tell you what my podcast looks like. Hold on one second.
Can you spell that app you were just talking about?
Oh yeah, Blink, like your blink, ist, I-S-T.
Blinkist. Nice.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we get a podcast. So I'm gonna go back past the business ones and tell you, I know Data Crunch is one of my favorite ones for sure. I listen to Data Crunch a lot. And then beyond that, I listen to, let's see, which ones are specific for us? Data Skeptic is another one. They talk a lot about what I was talking about, you know, obviously when you encounter data, you know, kind of using that skepticism to kind of ask the questions, go down the rabbit hole. And then they talk also a lot about ethics in data, which is something that I think doesn't get talked enough about, because us as data scientists, just recently, actually with COVID, this was in the news, there was a data scientist who was put under pressure by the Florida government to actually put out data to say that COVID wasn't as bad as it was. And she wouldn't do it and she got fired. So that's when we need, that's why I say we need to talk about data ethics. And I've been saying that for years, and we see things like this happen and people are like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, this is what happens when we don't have ethical practices. I've been in situations before, I know, where people have been like, well, we really want the data to look like this. So, and they kind of hold you as the messenger accountable. And you're like, hey, I can't make the numbers say what they don't say. So as being a gatekeeper comes with a lot of responsibility that I don't think gets talked about. And you need to be able to know like how to make the right decisions and calls in a lot of instances when maybe ethics are coming into play. So that's another good one. Data framed is one that I like as well. And then data science ethics is another podcast I listen to. And then lastly, data minds, like mind, like your mind, is another one that I listen to. So those are probably the ones I listen to the most. And then I listen to a bunch of TED Talks, NPR, you know, all that kind of stuff too. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. I was going to say thank you to all of you for having me. I really appreciate you all being so flexible.
Yeah, everyone is saying thank you in the chat as well. That's awesome. So a couple of follow-ups. Dr. Durr, would you mind messaging me the link to some of your resources that you mentioned tonight? And then I will shortly after this send out an email from the meetup page. So everyone who's in here is also on the meetup page. So I'll send out that email about the links for Women Who Code and also for the awesome resources that Dr. Durr shared with us tonight.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Please join us on the Slack channel if you have not already joined in. And if, Dr. Durr, how can we get a hold of you if we have more questions for you after this?
So the slides that I have my links and stuff in them. So that's right here. But then I will obviously share that all with you. So you'll have all of my links. You can find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. That's always the fastest way. But I also have a link so you can schedule a meeting with me if you want to chat further about anything that we discussed here today. I'm always happy to mentor anyone looking for guidance around where to go next.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for a wonderful meeting, everyone.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye.